Modern Book Review, where we interview students from CLCV 2305 Ancient Science and Technology to get their takes on groundbreaking modern philosophy books assigned by their wonderful professor, Dr. Harrison. Today we've invited Erin Duxbury to discuss her reading on The Moral Circle by Jeff Sabo. So Erin, we have a couple of questions for you. First of all, is there any piece of evidence or wisdom in this book that you would disagree with? And why would you do this? And what would you suggest as an alternative?
Yes, well, there is a passage that I disagree with, or a couple of them. Here, let me read it for you. In a world with a vast number and wide range of potential moral patients, all food systems are risky, but some are riskier than others. And if insect farming is both massively and unnecessarily risky, then we might need to kill the industry in its larval stage. I disagree with this statement because the risk for insect farming can be mitigated through careful selection of edible species. Creating a list of insect species that are considered pests in agroecosystems versus edible species that should be conserved and enhanced in agroecosystems can help mitigate the risks of harming endangered and threatened insects. From an environmental sustainability standpoint, insect farming has many advantages, such as it requires less land and has lower water requirements. In order to protect future generations of animals and humans, and even insects on Earth from climate change, and to meet the high demand for food worldwide, I believe insect farming industry should not be killed in its larval stage. Would you like to hear another passage that I disagree with? All right, great. Here it is. New technologies not only introduce new threats, but also amplify old ones. For example, AI could increase the risk of pandemics by facilitating the creation of harmful pathogens. It could increase the risk of climate change by contributing to industrialization. It could increase the risk of totalitarianism by contributing to military technology. And it could increase the risk of nuclear war by automating processes that previously required humans. There's not a lot of evidence, however, to suggest that AI could increase the risk of pandemics by facilitating the creation of harmful pathogens. The literature suggests that artificial intelligence actually represents a valuable tool that could be widely used to inform clinical and public health decision-making by effectively manage the impacts of pandemics. One study suggests that AI could be used to create new pathogens as forms of bioterrorism. However, the academic community appears to favor responsible development with appropriate safeguards rather than blanket restrictions on AI enabling biological research. I would suggest that the author present both sides of this debate, as a one-side debate does not present this other perspective.
Well, thank you for that long-winded discussion, Erin. I have another question for you, if that's all right. What are some practical implications of the ideas presented in the book for your own life and in the world around you? Do you have any passages that describe this?
Why, yes, I do, Erin. Thank you so much for asking. One of the passages I wish to share is, as Sabo says, I will simply assume that we should include all vertebrates, many invertebrates, including insects, and many silicone-based beings, specifically many of the AI systems, since I think it would be difficult to deny at least this much in good faith. Here, the author provides an apt summary of which beings are considered part of the moral circle in his eyes. This is applicable piece of information that seems reasonable. If one agrees with him, this list can form the basis of who we choose to consider when making decisions. Are you ready for another passage, Erin? Okay, let's go for it. Here, Sabo says, first, before recoiling at the idea that we might have duties of assistance to sextillions of non-humans, we should keep in mind that this idea has no direct or obvious implication, but how we should live. This will depend on a variety of interconnected factors, and there is no need to assume the worst, say the inevitable or of excessive self-sacrifice at this onset. In this passage, Sabo provides insight into how we can apply the knowledge gained in this book. He notes that each decision has interconnected factors, and there are no direct laws of guidance or guidelines to abide by in which we might broaden when we broaden our moral circle. In an everyday context, making decisions that consider sextillions of non-humans is limited by our capacity to help them, or our circumstances and our assets/resources. I'm going to read another passage. Do we have enough time for that? Well, I'm glad to hear it. Okay. Here Sibo says, in this case, even if David remains confident that his preferred kind of consequentialism is correct in theory, he may not always be able to assess the impacts of his actions reliably in practice. In these moments, he might find it useful to ask what would happen if everyone performed the same action in this situation. While this heuristic is by no means perfect, it can still be a good way to select better, less risky actions in cases where impact assessments are hard to conduct. Here, Sibo provides a strategy for how to consider beings in everyday contexts. He says that we should be asking, what would happen if everyone performed the same action in this situation? This strategy can help us make decisions that align with our ethics in a much reduced time frame. This can be applied to many contexts, as impact assessments are often hard to conduct. I'm going to read another passage that provides some applicable strategies for the ideas in the book. Here, Sibo says, through ordinary actions, such as eating lunch or using the internet, as we will see, whether we or countless others survive this new age will depend in part on how we comport with this new reality. Here, Sibo provides some examples of when we should consider the expanded moral circle in everyday life, such as when we are eating lunch or using the internet. We could, for instance, choose a plant-based alternative for lunch, or we could avoid purchasing new products off of Amazon. I have a longer passage to share from you about an everyday student named Sinan, who is an example used by Sibo. I will paraphrase from what Sibo has said. Sinan performs thousands of actions each day where sextillions of potential stakeholders are involved in each decision he makes. It would be impossible for him to assess how all of his actions might affect all of these beings. However, Sinan can still accept that his potential impact on these beings merits consideration. Even if Sinan lacks the ability to consider every possible impact of every possible action, he still has the ability to factor in the potential impacts into his decision-making by routinely making small-scale decisions about how to treat insects, AI systems, and other such beings. Such as treating ants, he could, for instance, treat ants and chatbots with kindness rather than cruelty. Sinan can consider these beings when selecting the rules that he follows in everyday life. By doing this, it does not require him to assess how to treat each ant or chatbot or other being in each of his decisions. As a general policy, he can relocate ants or support companies that align with his general policies. The general policies he creates can then inform his habits, relationships, and other structures in his life. Relevant behaviors will simply flow out of him in relevant situations. Thus, he can build a community with people who maintain similar policies and habits, which will help him build the future that he would like to live in. Here, Sibo provides an example of an everyday student who will make decisions with a broadened moral circle. Sinan makes everyday decisions such as whether to treat ants and AI with kindness or cruelty. He looks ahead to the future and makes thoughtful decisions on how to treat these moral patients so that if one day he makes larger decisions with greater impacts for them, he will instinctually know how to treat them. Providing this as example, so Sibo provides this example, allows us to see clearly how someone similar to ourselves could apply the expanded moral circle in our lives. Sibo makes the point that by considering the more expanded moral circle every day, we will create general policies that will continue throughout our lives so that we do not have to expend energy considering all of the sextillions of moral patients in all of our decisions. This is a practical steps that we can take to make considering other than human beings a more manageable task. In his final word on habits and relationships, Sibo provides an optimistic view for how to make general policies that align with the expanded moral circle, which can become instinctual habits so that they become an unconscious fixture in our lives. He says that general policies that become personal habits can benefit Simon as he builds a community around him that maintains similar values. This example provides a benefit to applying the expanded moral circle in our lives. I'm going to share a little bit more about Simon, who was the young student in the previous example. As Sibo says, if Simon expands his moral circle in these ways, will he always treat non-humans well? Almost certainly not. His ability to consider his impacts is still limited, and his decisions, policies, and habits and relationships will likely lead him astray in many cases. But he can still treat non-humans better. He can improve his impacts on other, or at least some non-humans here and now. He can treat non-humans with respect and compassion whether or not his actions make a difference for them. And he can influence others, including his own future self, to expand his moral circle in similar ways. In this excerpt, this expert explains how seinen, an everyday student, is not duty-bound to abide by hard and fast rules. Making mistakes, i.e. Failing to consider non-humans in a decision, is not the end of the world. What Simon has to do is to try to improve his impacts on at least some non-humans, here and now. He may sometimes be limited by his small field of influence and his duties to his family and other humans close to him that override such considerations for non-humans. This example can provide some relief for us, knowing that a failure to consider a moral patient is not the be-all, end-all. We will try to do our best every single time in every next decision. Millions of tiny decisions are made each day, and there are plenty of chances and ways to consider non-humans in the future. This idea makes the goal of expanding our moral circle more achievable.
Thank you so much, Erin, for providing those passages and for telling us about your thoughts on those passages as well. I have another question for you. Did the author actually cite any evidence, not just what he thinks or feels, and was this evidence appropriate to the material under discussion?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Erin. I certainly have so much to say. Here's a passage from Sibo that I feel will show some true evidence. The sentience view asserts that sentient beings are welfare subjects. You count as a sentient when you experience positive states like pleasure or happiness, or negative states like pain or suffering. This view holds that sentient beings are welfare subjects because things are good for you when they bring you happiness and bad for you when they bring you suffering. Another common view is the agency view, which asserts that agents are welfare subjects. You count as an agent when you can set and pursue your own goals. Here, Sibo provides one of many ethical frameworks for us to consider as part of the expanding our moral circle, e.g., he explains the sentience view and the agency view. And he states which one he endorses. By presenting all relevant ethical views that he endorses and those that he does not, he allows the reader to make their own decision on which one they choose to follow. Providing the strength and weaknesses of each gives the reader agency, allowing them to form their own ethical beliefs. Here is another passage from Sibo that also provides some relevant evidence. In his influential book, Animal Liberation, Peter Singer argues for the principle of equal consideration of interest. According to this principle, all equal interests merit equal consideration, no matter whose interests they are. Here, Sibo outlines the ethical framework created by Peter Singer, an influential philosopher. Although Sibo does not wholly endorse this view, he presents it impartially, allowing the reader to see the benefits and the faults of the theory. Once again, this allows for a more whole entire view of the ethics that he is discussing in the book. In yet another example of this, SIBO says, according to the unequal weight theory, some moral patients really do have more at stake in life than others. For example, since the elephant has a more complex brain than the ant, they can experience more happiness, suffering, and other such states at a given time. Since the elephant has a longer lifespan than the ant, they can also experience more happiness, suffering, and other states, such states than the ant. The best possible elephant's life is, in fact, better than the best possible ant's life. Here, SIBO provides contrasting theories by Peter Singer. This allows us to see the variation and dichotomy of moral beliefs. SIBO has not yet revealed which one he endorses. This is appropriate to the subject matter as it provides a more rounded, all-encompassing view of the issues or examples in question, so the reader can make an informed decision of what they wish to endorse. We have another example of this, where SIBO says, according to the non-aggression view, the intrinsic value of welfare is not combinable across individuals in this kind of way. If an individual migraine is worse than an individual minor headache, then an individual migraine is worse than any number of minor headaches. In contrast, according to the aggression view, the intrinsic value of welfare is combinable across individuals in this kind of way. A sufficiently large number of minor headaches can be worse than a single migraine, even if we may not always know what the number is. Similarly, a sufficiently large number of ants can carry more weight than a single elephant. Providing these two contrasting views provides for an all-encompassing explanation of the diversity of ethical views that are reasonable to consider in his book. He brings in outside information and applies it to examples within the context of his work, e.g. the elephant versus the ant example. Here we have a slightly different passage by SIBO, which says, France, Quebec, Colombia, Mexico City, and other governments now recognize many animals as sentient beings. And the Constitutional Court of Ecuador, the Delhi High Court in India, the Istanbul High Court of Pakistan, and other legal authorities now recognize some animals as right holders. Here, SIBO uses government policy decisions as evidence that animals are sentient beings. This evidence was appropriate because many philosophers, such as Peter Singer, considered sentient beings to be part of the moral circle. Thus, if we view the moral circle with knowledge of sentientism, we should consider these animals that have been established as sentient. In another passage by SIBO, he says, philosophers typically draw the line somewhere between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 10 quadrillion. My own interest is in the lower threshold, is that the lower thresholds are more plausible than higher ones. Here, SIBO provides the full range of estimates for the thresholds of moral consideration that he provides in his proves that he considers to be in his own opinion.
Erin, it has been so lovely talking to you. We have one last question left. Do you think you can stay awake? I'm glad you can. So how does this book fit into other recent books on the subject? Well, Erin, this question certainly had me digging into the literature for this one. Don't worry, I was up to the challenge. As described by Peter Singer, a famous philosopher for his ethics on animal welfare, the moral circle represents a significant contribution to the debate on expanding moral consideration. The book, The Moral Circle, builds on Peter Singer's foundational work, The Expanding Circle, Ethics and Social Biology, which was published in 1981. In this book, Peter Singer argues that, over the course of human history, people have expanded the moral circle of beings whose interests they are willing to value similarly. Rather like Peter Singer's landmark book, Animal Liberation, The Moral Circle addresses members of Western, largely secular, technology-saturated, high-consuming societies, such as the US and Canada and other large players.
The moral circle pushes the boundaries of animal ethics discussions. Earlier works focus on animals and birds, while CBOS stands out for its considerations on microbes and insects as well. This represents a more radical expansion than most recent books. Recent publications on the topic include From Mice to Monkeys, Beyond Orthodox Approaches to the Ethics of Animal Model Consideration by Rebecca L. Walker and Matthias Eget. There is growing academic attention to the moral circle expansion as a promising strategy to impact the far future, with peer-reviewed research examining how many sentient beings suffering serious harm due to lack of moral consideration. Thus, CBO's work aligns with recent developments like the Washington State's octopus farming ban, which represents practical implications of the moral circle expansion. The book The Moral Circle argues for a major expansion in society's perception of the moral circle, to include animals, insects, present and future AI systems, and microbes, using a case study approach. Unlike many purely theoretical ethics books, CBO explores case studies such as lawsuits over captive elephants and debates over factory farming insects. This distinguishes it from more theoretical works. The Moral Circle also joins the discussion on AI integration. While most recent AI ethics books focus on algorithm-based bias, privacy, and safety concerns, CBO addresses the fundamental questions on whether AI systems themselves might deserve moral consideration. This connects to emerging academic works on moral circle consideration by AI systems by 2030, directly paralleling CBO's inclusion of AI in the moral circle. So those were the works that it was most similar to. Now I'm going to describe the works that were less similar to CBO's book. The Moral Circle is less related to traditional AI ethics books focusing on algorithm basis and safety. Books like Weapons of Math Destruction and The Alignment Problem focus on how AI systems affect humans rather than whether AIs deserve moral consideration themselves. The works that I have described raise questions about the future relationships between humans and machines, but do not consider AI as a moral patient. Jeff CBO's book is also furthest from human-centered bioethics, a traditional medical ethics that maintains strict boundaries for human moral consideration, which contrasts CBO's expansive approach. The key distinguishing factor between many of these books and CBO's is scope. Works closest to CBO's embrace radical expansion of moral consideration across multiple categories of beings, e.g. animals, AIs, and AI systems, and microbes, while the furthest works maintain more traditional boundaries around who and what deserves moral consideration. So that's all I have for you today, Erin. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for joining us on the Modern Book Review. We look forward to hearing from you in future episodes. Thank you to our producers, Erin Duxbury, our video editor, Erin Duxbury, and to me, your host, Erin Duxbury, and of course, our esteemed guest, Erin Duxbury. See you next time.